Hi, my name is Jennifer Dotson. I am the founder and program coordinator for Highland Park Poetry, and I'm so glad that you can join us today. I have a special guest, author Pamela Miller. Pamela grew up on the south side of Chicago and had no idea there was also a north side of Chicago until she was 18. Since making this astounding discovery, she has lived all of her adult life on the north side, where she has been writing and performing poetry for more than 30 years. Her work has been published in a wide variety of literary magazines and anthologies, including the Paris Review, Pudding, the MacGuffin, Wisconsin Review, After Hours, Wicked Alice, Dangerous Dames, and many more. She's published at least 4 collections of poetry: Recipe for Disaster, Mysterious Coleslaw, and Fast Little Shoes. Her most recent collection is Miss Unthinkable, recently published by Mayapple Press in 2013. Welcome, Pamela. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me, Jennifer.
Oh, well, it's a wonderful to have you here. Highland Park Poetry first became acquainted with your work, I guess, was it 4 years ago?
I think
something like
somewhere
that.
like
yeah,
a few years ago.
With our annual Poetry That Moves contest,
right.
And your poem, I don't even know the title of it, Mrs.
Mrs. Carson talks about her first marriage.
Yes, that was selected as our February poem to sort of coincide with love.
Or an ironic sort of way.
Disasters in love. And that appeared on North Shore suburban pace buses operating between Evanston and Highland Park. And now the program has expanded to all the way up to Waukegan.
Oh, really?
And your last year, your poem,
Song to Myself at 60.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind, let's read that first one to get us started.
Okay, yeah, this is definitely not a nice love poem. Mrs. Carson talks about her first marriage. It was like mixing toothpaste and peanut butter around and around in a great big bowl and then sticking your face in it for 37 years.
Okay.
So it goes over, I think, a lot of people who have had bad relationships. Yes. They always seem to relate to that very well.
Yes, no, that's a delightful poem, and it was just so compact and short, and probably gave the people riding the bus a lot to think about. Right. Could you also read the other poem that was selected for, and I think that was featured in our December 2013.
Yeah, right at the
bus.
end of the year.
Yes.
Yeah, by the way, I don't know if other Poetry on the Bus poets do this, but it's really fun because I take the 215 Pace Crawford bus, and it's kind of cool to sit there and look at your poem being up there.
That's wonderful.
This is I don't write a lot of rhyming poetry, but this is an exception. This is in a form that's called a triolet. This is Song to Myself at 60. At 60, I walk in boots of light. The years stream behind me like a comet's tail. My future's hidden on the other side of night. At 60, I walk in boots of light. The years before me scatter like crows in flight, but a clutter of joy hides the end of the trail. So I dawdle and meander in my boots of light. The years stream behind me like a bridal veil. And that was a poem about turning 60. I wrote a turning 50 poem when I turned 50, and then I wrote this, and it's just kind of thinking about feeling good about where you are, but at the same time not, kind of starting to think about your own mortality a little bit, and what don't know how much more time you have, but you're going to enjoy it while you can.
Good, excellent. Well, I thought it was a very beautiful and inspiring poem, and obviously our judge that selected the poem.
It was Tanya Runyon, the great Tanya Runyon.
Yeah, she loved it. Can you talk to us a little bit about Miss Unthinkable? This is your 4th book.
Right.
How is this different from your other books?
Well, it's different in kind of a bunch of ways. You know, I think I'm sort of known as someone who uses a lot of humor in their poetry, and after, you know, all these years, I first of all, I was starting to feel like I was maybe getting typecast as a funny poet, and I wanted to maybe try to get a little more serious, because I just did a workshop for Rhino magazine called Funny Poetry Don't Get No Respect, or Do It. And, you know, a lot of times when you write humorous poetry, there are a certain amount of people who kind of think poetry is supposed to be serious all the time. It's supposed to be beautiful and enlightening and talk about, you know, serious, important issues. A few years ago, I did a reading in San Francisco, and some guy I didn't even know came up to me afterwards, and he said, you know what your problem is? You have to decide whether you want to be a poet or whether you want to be a stand-up comedian.
Oh, that was nice.
And yeah, well, I think it's possible to be both, but at the same time, I thought, well, you know, maybe I need to try getting a little more serious here. I didn't want to throw humor completely out the window, because
well,
that's just, yes. But I started experimenting with a bunch of things, and this, I'm a very slow writer, so this book was written over a period of about 10 years, actually. And
I have to tell you right now that is very reassuring.
Oh, you can relate.
Well, you know, actually, I try to challenge myself each year to write the same number of poems that we have years in so like this year is 2014. So my goal is to write 14 good poems.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 2,000.
No.
Like, wow. Yeah.
No. So I would feel great if I have, like, at the end of the year, I have 14 good poems. I'd feel, all right.
But, you know, I started looking at ways to maybe write poems that were a little more funny and yet had a little bit more depth to them.
Okay.
And I started, first of all, trying to write sort of poems that use humor to make a more serious statement. Like I have a funny poem about global warming that is sort of funny on the surface, but it makes a very kind of, you know.
Do you want to share that with us now? That would be great.
Sure. This is a prose poem. It's called Prophecies for the Year 2050. There will be sightings of fiery spaceships in the president's bathroom mirror. There will be hell to pay and water to bail. Our hearts will grow as tiny and stony as cherry pits. There will be whales in the bracken and penguins in the pines, and skies so slippery the stars slide off. There will be making of preternatural din. The earth will evolve into fire, and the water will crawl up on dry land. The trees will be brittle as fingernails, bald as bats. The mountains will twist into cryptic shapes. There will be really nasty rainbows as grimy as unwashed necks. There will be factories of laughter implanted in our chins. The gargoyles on Notre Dame will read trashy novels all day. The plague will start in Chile and gnaw its way north, then pinwheel across the world like a spinning scimitar. Those rickety old stairs up to heaven will be destroyed by a fire of suspicious origin. Our leaders will be as soft and boneless as marshmallow peeps. There will be creepy-looking writing on walls of light that burst from the earth at night like ghostly fists. Our dead will return wearing nightgowns of smoke and set our houses on fire. And they'll howl at us in foghorn tones. It's all your fault, your sticky-fingered fault. There will be nothing left but fire and granite-hearted God, and he'll have bigger things than fish to fry.
Okay, well, you definitely got in a darker image there.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that you were able to use peeps in a poem.
Oh yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Maybe now that goes back to your comment about comedy and poetry doesn't always get respect. Is that because oftentimes the things that either the nature of what people find funny changes more rapidly than what people find sort of poetic? Or,
No, I think it's just really, I mean, there are a lot of wonderful, witty, funny poets who have been big influences on my work, like the great Kenneth Koch, Ron Padgett, Billy Collins, the former poet laureate, absurdist poets like Russell Edson and James Tate, and Paul Violi. But again, I think there's just a certain amount of people out there who have very preconceived notions about what poetry is supposed to be. Like, for example, I have a wonderful friend, Bill Yarrow, who is a very, very interesting and very funny local poet, and he teaches online poetry classes at, I forget, I think it's Joliet Junior College. And he uses my, my third book, Recipe for Disaster, as one of the texts in his class, and then he also gives them Sylvia Plath.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So some people appreciate the fact that my book is funny, but every at the end of the semester, he sends me the students' online comments, and there's always a few sour balls in there to say, well, I don't think it's appropriate, to use words like, I have one poem that uses the word spitooey, and like, I don't think it's appropriate to use the word spitooey in a poem. And
well, obviously there's a whole, there are hordes and hordes of people who were just abused in their 12th grade English class to think that only serious poetry matters.
Well, it's tough because I really think the way they teach poetry in school and making you memorize, I don't know if they still do that now. I had to memorize poetry. And I think that the way they teach poetry, especially in high school, really kind of just drives people away. And on the other hand, I've had a lot of people tell me that they like my work because it's sort of poetry for people who don't like poetry, because because it is funny and it is sometimes
it's
silly.
Accessible
and,
too, And I don't think, I've said this before, so often you read the New Yorker and sometimes they put stuff in there that I just like, what? I don't get it. I don't, and I'm working really hard to try and get it, and I can't. It's just like a crazy word salad that has no meaning for me. So I like poems that have kind of a narrative. I mean,
Yeah, because my poetry is very narrative. On the other hand, when I read a poet like Wallace Stevens, I love his stuff, but I just, maybe it's me, but I never understand what he's talking about in these poems. I have, something like The Emperor of Ice Cream. I have no idea what that poem is about. But I just love the way it sounds, and I get little flashes of meaning, and I just love the wordplay, and I think I like poems that make the reader work a little bit to kind of figure out.
I'm not saying that poetry has to all be like soft serve ice cream. But I guess I do like to be somewhat accessible. As well as engaging. And I think I certainly think your writing definitely is that.
Thank you.
Well, did you want to read something from this book, The Recipe for
Well,
Disaster?
I think I sort of, you know, we kind of went off on a tangent.
Okay.
Because you had asked me what was some of the ways that
right.
the new book was different. And another thing that I tried to do with that book is try to play around really for the first time with kind of traditional poetic forms. And I had never really used a lot of traditional forms. I had used, you know, prose poems and sometimes list poems and numbered poems, instructional, but I had never really used like real poetic forms.
Like the Triolet example.
Yeah, the Triolet. And actually in Recipe for Disaster, I used a lot of what I call everyday forms. Like there are several recipe poems in the forms of recipes. There's a resume poem. But when I was getting back to this idea of, you know, I've got to try to maybe bring some more depth into my stuff, and I started playing around with these forms, and it was hard. You know, if you've never written that way, I just got out Ron Padgett's good old handbook of poetic forms, and so I just started trying all this stuff. And in Miss Unthinkable, there's an alphabet poem, and then I started writing guzzles. And
that's how you pronounce that.
Yeah, I think that sounds. Okay. Yeah, I think gazelle sounds, but I've just heard so many people say guzzles.
Okay.
And I found that like having a constraint, like it having to be an alphabet poem, or it had to be, you know, it had to use repetition of lines. It kind of took me out of my my comfort zone, and it kind of, you know, because when you write free verse, you can kind of, you know, let the poem do what it wants to do, but when you're following a formal constraint, you have to kind of rely a lot more on craft, and you have to make it work. And then I really started surprising myself, because I was coming up with stuff that was very different than what I usually wrote. And then I started saying, well, I'm going to make it harder, and I'm going to give myself two constraints. So I did an alphabet poem that was also a guzzle, and I did an alphabet poem called Encyclopedia of the Unseen, where it not only had to start with the letter of the alphabet, but it had to be something that fit the concept of unseen, whether it was invisible ink or, you know, Jimmy Hoffa hiding beneath the turnpike. And I also played around. I had never written a parody of a famous poem, and there are two parodies in there. I used a form called mistranslation, which is a wonderful, wonderful
How does that
poem.
work?
Well, how that works is you take a poem that's in a foreign language, preferably one that you don't understand a word of. And then you use that as a basis for writing a poem in English, and since these foreign words literally make no sense, you just start writing a poem based on kind of what those foreign words sort of sound like. Yeah, so you're not literally translating it line by line or word, but it kind of sparks things. Like I did one mistranslation of a Spanish poem, and there were things like, you know, I don't speak Spanish, so my accent's but you know, involato galoso, and that ended up turning into pay no attention to death and his inevitable galoshes. And so there's some of that in there. And then the hardest thing that I did was trying to write a pantoum. And that's, you know, it's kind of like a villanelle. It's a poem that uses, it's a form that uses repeating lines in a pattern. And that was really, boy, that was so hard to write. And at one point, because like you have to, with a pantoum, you have to start with a line, and then you keep repeating the first and third lines.
Okay.
And then at the end of the poem, you have to go back to your first line. And I really felt like, oh God, I've painted myself into a corner here. I don't know, this poem is going on, and I don't know how I'm going to go back to that first line.
Okay.
So it was really just, I'm glad that I tried these things, because I got some work that I think was much more in depth and that really surprised me. But at the same time, it would drive me crazy, and I ended up writing a poem about how hard it was to write.
Is that the one on page 17, the trying to write poems?
That you wanted me to read.
Yes, that is, it does sort of capture your struggle
It was
very
just,
well.
I just had to let off some steam. So this is on trying to write poems with formal constraints after writing free verse for 30 years. I am holding a poem between my knees. It keeps wriggling and squirming, so I clamp it even tighter like a human panini machine. It wants me to let it poke its head out so it can yak, 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 yak. It wants to warble the sextet from Lucia de Lammermoor in the voices of 6 of Disney's 7 dwarfs. It wants to go down to the dairy dip and get an ice cream. Can it please, oh please? It wants to rent a villa on that same old moon-drenched lake where it has dragged me for the past 11 Augusts. But I tell the poem, no, no, no. You must stand on one leg like a stork. I tie it to a hard, bare chair of academic rigor and make it juggle 47 spoons. I make it suck up an endless string of knockwursts through a straw and serve them up on toast in every line. I am trying to steer my bone-lazy craft into uncharted waters and infested with sea monsters, my eyes fixed on a new North Star as rococo as a snowflake, the poem lashed writhing and moaning to the mast with chains of metered couplets, while the overfed sirens of the usual shriek at us from bayonet-sharp rocks. It used to be so easy to dally on the shore, while the poems frisked naked as tadpoles in the surf, filling their little pails with shells and spume. But now I'm squeezing a poem inside my boa constrictor fist, cinching it tight in the formalist muse's wasp-waist iron corsets, oblivious as God to the din of its whimpering, straining my ears for the triumphant crunch of diamonds erupting out of coal. So that was really what it felt like, and forcing the poem into places that it didn't want to go. But
no, that's you definitely captured that struggle. That was good. And this book, though, does have is broken into the 3 sections.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, the first section, I put a lot of the formal. I had never put a book in sections before, and I really kind of tried to plan the order and the structure of this book a lot more than I did with previous books, and then my publisher said she didn't like the structure, so I had to do it again. But all of her criticisms were wonderful, and they did help me make the book stronger. So in the first section, the first section is the most kind of miscellaneous one, but a lot of the formal poems are in there, and a lot of poems that are not as personal, because through most of my career, I almost never write about myself. Because I think I'm just not that interesting, and if I do write about stuff that's going on in my own life, I tend to do it in kind of a disguised way. But this book, another thing that I did was that it started becoming more personal, first of all. And another thing that I had always wanted to do was write a big, long sequence of thematically linked poems.
Okay.
And I could never do it. Every time I tried, I would always get like 3, and then I would either lose interest or I would run out of ideas. But this sequence, the second section, The Body at 50, is a sequence of 11 poems.
Yeah.
And the impetus for that whole sequence was I was involved with a project with Woman Made Gallery in Chicago, and they had an art show and also a poetry reading called Inhabiting the Body. And Nina Corwin, the poet who curates their stuff, she sent out a call for submissions, and she gave a lot of suggestions for different ways to write poems about the body. And I started using those as like impetuses for different poems. And the other thing that was happening was that I had turned 50, and you know, when you get to be that age, your body kind of starts, you know, you don't have the energy that you used to, and you know, some people are able to keep their youthful figure, but you know, a lot of people at 50 are getting kind of, you know, you're not, you know, your body is all sagging and stuff. And I started writing a series of poems about kind of trying to get used to having this 50-year-old body. And I just kind of kept writing them, and things started happening. First of all, I started having a couple of health issues that I hurt my back, and I ended up having to have back surgery because I just, you know, had these terrible back problems all of a sudden. And then after that, you know, they say that for a lot of women, their risk for breast cancer rises right after 50. So at 51, I got breast cancer right on schedule. But luckily, they found it very, very early. But it was still, you know, a very traumatic experience. And so I started writing, you know, kind of a cancer treatment sequence, and you know, so it started getting darker and more serious and also more personal. And so by this time I had like a bunch of them, and I said, I don't know where this is going. I'm going to just keep writing these Body at 50 poems all through my 50s and kind of, you know, see what else happens. And then, of course, eventually I had to do the menopause poem. And, and so I ended up with this, this 11-poem sequence that, frankly, I was very proud of, because I didn't think I could do anything that ambitious.
Well, it's wonderful. I mean, Miss Unthinkable is a terrific book. And people can come and see more, and here you read more of your poetry on Saturday, June 28th at 8 p.m. at Madame Zuzu's, which is on Roger Williams in the Ravinia neighborhood. And Pamela Miller will be our featured guest, and we'll hope you join us. Thanks so much.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, it's
Thank
wonderful.
You.
Thank you.
All right.